Welcome to my shop. Something I want to show y'all. PCP hand pump automation. Is it possible? Is it reliable? Is it cost effective? My bet is that just about anybody that has owned a PCP hand pump has thought once or twice about running it from some kind of machine, air piston, something. There's 2 or 3 videos here on YouTube of a couple of designs, some hydraulic rams, some air rams, one direct gear drive box done with I believe a Hotson pump, and a gentleman filling a Hotson BT65 rifle. This is a similar design. I've had this Benjamin pump now for about 2 years. It has been beat and beat and beat. I cannot repeat that enough. This poor pump. They're tough. There's the hill pump, and I know a lot of people are probably going to argue with me on this, but honestly, for the extra almost $200 that the 3-stage hill pump cost, for me, they're just not worth the extra money. I did rebuild this pump once. It's extremely easy to do. Sun Optics company online, they provide a rebuild kit for these. If you do have a pump failure, Sun Optics warranties these pumps for a year. I believe Benjamin and Crossman, it's only 90 days. I could be wrong on that. Feel free to comment on that if I'm mistaken. The pump lasted, like I said, I've had it for 2 years. It lasted a good year and 6 months, being used by hand all the time. I'm a pretty light guy, about 5'10", 150 pounds. It is recommended right in the paperwork for these that you weigh at minimum 150 pounds, because if you've used one of these, you know what I'm talking about. When you get up closer to that 200 bar, 3000 psi mark, I have to use inertia to get the pump to go to its final pressure, not just my weight. I just don't weigh enough. So I beat it up hard and fast. The whole pause at the bottom, pause at the top, yeah, that didn't happen. So I wanted to come up with a way to do this inexpensively and reliably. There, of course, is scuba tanks, the way most people go if they don't want to use a hand pump. The nearest dive shop for me personally is about 42 miles one way. That's 80 miles just to go get a scuba tank filled, and I shoot a lot. Scuba tanks are expensive. The adapters, the regulators, the hoses. Gone down this road before, you know there's all kinds of different adapters, and so it's overwhelming to the new guy. When I got my Marauder, I got the pump. Here it is. I have filled a scuba tank with it. I don't recommend it. It takes forever, and it's extremely hard on the pump, also on the gearbox. Now, is this cost effective to do new parts? Absolutely not. These Granger gearboxes right here, they're a 90-degree worm drive. They run about $200 to $300 depending on what size you get, depending on the gear ratio. If you know anybody that works as a millwright or a maintenance person in automation, food processing plants, a lot of factories have these for running conveyor belts or small machinery, small equipment. These are not designed for continuous use. They are only intermittent use. This particular setup here was what's called a C-face mount. C as in Charlie, meaning it had the motor mounted directly to the gearbox, and I'll show that to you here in a minute. This motor I got from a very, very good friend of mine, and if you're watching this, you know who you are. Thank you very much. The gearbox I also got from that gentleman. I collect whatever laying around, machinery, old parts, pieces, metal, scrap. So if you have some of this stuff, you know, and put your brain to work, you can come up with some usable equipment out of it. The motor ran a large air circulation fan in a hospital in a local town next to us here. This motor is, I believe, from 1952. Second-hand stores sometimes. Search online. I mean, there's millions and millions and millions of these things out there. They can be had for next to nothing. Was asking around for motors, and I ended up getting a 3-phase, 1 horsepower, 1725 RPM motor for free. The gentleman working there he gave it to me because, I mean, this stuff is just laying around. So it's belt drive. Just to slow it down. You can get these motors 1725 RPM, 1500 RPM, 14. I've seen them down to 1200 RPM. The slower motors at 110 or 220 volt single phase are expensive. 1750, 1725, the common run-of-the-mill, if you will, motor, and they're much, much cheaper. These motors new, 220 volt, single phase, 1725, you can get them for about 89 bucks, $100. That's usually with shipping online. I've seen them on eBay, places like that. If you source them, if you find them, you can get them really cheap used. I did put one new end bell bearing in this, a common 5/8 bearing, local hardware store. In fact, it was Ace Hardware. I think it was $6 for the bearing. Heat it up, drive the old one out, drive a new one in, put the 4 screws back together. These are extremely simple to take apart. If you've ever had a starter motor from a car part, any electric motor, 4 screws, 2 caps, they fall off. Armature comes out, it's very simple. This particular motor is a very simplistic design. It is not reversible. I won't get into a lot of details or electrical wiring. I don't know a lot about it myself. I kind of had to take a crash course. Some motors, the original motor that came off of this, they are reversible. If you don't know what you're doing with AC electricity, I recommend take it into any local commercial or residential electric motor repair, maintenance, service, and sales department. They can be found just about anywhere in any town. If you find a good motor like this, more than likely it won't have a plug on it. It's just going to have a couple of wires off of it. Take it into them, throw it on the bench, kind of explain what you're doing, and more than likely they'll put a plug, standard 110 or 220 plug on the end of it for you, probably for free. Again, this particular motor was not reversible, so I ended up taking the starter capacitor off of that motor because worm gearboxes, when the pump comes under a load, you need the input shaft here, which I'll show you up close here in a second. It needs to torque towards the thrust bearing inside of this. Not this way, that way. That's important. These are very, very common. They're very easy to find. It works awesome for doing this. So if you're going to try it, that's an important thing to know because you may not even realize you're doing damage to it, even though it is going to run your pump and it is going to work. So if your motor doesn't go the right way and it's not reversible, there's a solution. And I'll explain that in a second. Okay, so that was a whole bunch of information. Let's see. The bench it's mounted on. This is an old Craftsman or Black & Decker, I'm not sure. Black & Decker, Workmate. Has two handles down here to adjust the table in and out to clamp items in the middle of it. I mounted the motor carriage down to 1/2 of it so I could move it in and out, tighten or loosen my belt as needed. This is just an old piece of 2" by inch, I believe 3/16" wall steel box tubing with a couple of flat bars welded to it, a piece of 2x2 steel box tubing there, 1/8" wall. I welded a couple of flat brackets to it, so gearbox just bolts right down to it. Most all these gearboxes, by the way, can be mounted from the top or the bottom. The output shaft can be reversed, so it can come out this side or this side. They're really flexible. Just a really neat unit to have. If you're into building this kind of stuff, or tinkering around in your shop. If you see one of these, trust me, grab it, throw it in a corner, you'll come up with a use for it someday. I did. 2 bearings here. These are pillow block bearings. They work great for this application because I'm not an engineer. None of this is very precise. These bearings are self-aligning, so you get them close, the bearing inside will move around, self-align for you. 13 bucks, eBay, free shipping for the pair of them. Don't go to your local bearing store unless, of course, you want to support local business. I fully understand. These bearings run about $80 to $90 a piece. I don't need that kind of quality for this setup, so Chinese made, 13 bucks a pair of them, good to go. They're stainless steel, they're hardened, they're actually good bearings. They have grease zerks on them for maintenance, which I'll show you. Pulleys, I ended up, like I was saying, I went belt drive with this to further slow down the setup because the gear ratio in this is a little high. I'll show you the specs on it here in a second. These can be had in 15 to 20 different ratios, from super slow to almost 1-to-1 drive. So if you get a direct motor on gearbox mount system that has a high enough ratio, or it's low geared enough, then you wouldn't need to belt drive it. You could also chain drive this. I like the belt drive because it adds a little extra protection because I can run it loose. If this comes up to too much pressure, something binds, the belt will just slip. Oh yeah, pulleys. They're cheap. I think they're aluminum. Again, I got them local hardware store, just a couple bucks. Chicago brand. This is a 4-inch pulley. I believe this is a 2-inch pulley, so gave me a 4-to-1 reduction through this. Yeah, it's pretty simple setup. It does work. Like I said, I've been using this pump for a long time. I did put one rebuild kit in, which just consists of purely O-rings. Don't go get regular O-rings. Trust me. While waiting for the rebuild kit for this pump, my father acquired a PCP air rifle, which I will have in an upcoming review. And I was filling his gun and my gun, and the old center high pressure O-ring had failed, the original one, so I just did what I could do. Local hardware store, got a black O-ring. One fill, one gun, done O-ring. Take it apart, new O-ring, one fill, one gun, you're done. Over and over and over. Don't waste your time. But you will get really good at rebuilding your pump. Since I put the Sun Optics rebuild kit in here, which I highly recommend, almost if you even have a new pump. The Benjamin pumps, I believe the Air Force pump, I think the same pump is sold under 2 or 3 different names. They are fairly under lubricated from the factory. They don't really have enough in them, so they will run a little hot. After I rebuilt this, I lubricated it sufficiently. You can use white dielectric grease. Local hardware store, Ace Hardware carries it. Couple bucks. It's pure white. It is a silicone-based grease. Do not use Siliglide silicone grease, which I'll show you that here in a minute. It does swell O-rings, creates a lot of friction, and it will make your pump fail fast. Pyramid Air, Airgun Depot, Airgun Place, all those places, they all carry proper silicone lubrication for these pumps. It's in a small couple ounce jar. I think it's like $9. It's worth it if you're going to maintain these pumps. Do not use any petroleum products. I'm sure you probably already know that if you're even thinking about rebuilding your pump. But trust me, 2300 psi, give or take, sometimes 2100 psi if the conditions are correct, you create a diesel engine. Petroleum products will ignite, they will burn. That's how a diesel engine runs. It just squeezes air, air gets hot, the fuel is injected, and boom, That's okay when it's in your pickup, not okay when it's in your pump. If you Google, look online, there was a young man that had this exact same pump, ordered his rebuild kit from Sun Optics company, and he lubricated it with 30 weight non-detergent oil. The factory fill hose that comes on these pumps, and if you own one, you're familiar with it, are stainless steel braided on the outside. Well, I believe it was, I don't know, somewhere 6 to 8 hours of surgery later, they were able to remove most of the stainless braiding out of that young man's feet because his pump blew up. It will happen. These things, we get used to them. They're quiet. It's just air, and we forget that there's 3,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. They will hurt you, so be careful. All that, Desiccant filters, auto parts store, 1/8 inch standard thread, screws right into these pump bodies. Highly recommend this. Even if you're using one by hand, especially if you're going to automate it like this and use it a lot, do yourself a favor, get one of these. It will cut down the rebuild time on these pumps to almost non-existent. You may go 4 years before you'd even need to take it apart because it keeps the crud out. The O-rings, they last longer. Works a lot better. If you're looking for good hardware to hook stuff up to these on the intake side of the pump, not high pressure, lamp hardware, the long threaded hollow tubes for lamps, they're 1/8 inch NPT thread, some of them. So that's a direct screw into the pump base, and then go ahead and screw your desiccant filter on there. It keeps the moisture out, keeps the crap out, works great. So let me bring you in here a little closer and show you some details. There's the 2 bearings, those standard pillow block bearings, grease circ. Got these nifty little caps on them. Kind of handy, directly lubricatable. I'm sure that's a word. There's the old gearbox, again 90-degree worm gear drive. Here's my little pump swing arm. Just a couple of flat bars welded together, nothing fancy. Boston gear 300 series, and they make several different ones, all in the 300 series. Some of them even have dual output shafts. Again, this cover right here can be removed, and then you can bring that over here and have it be what it would be considered a right-hand exit instead of a left-hand exit. So here's the pulleys. Standard, they're both 5/8 inside diameter. There is this collar right here goes into the gearbox. It's keyed. I have a 5/8 shaft shoved in there. There's no set screw in this. Most of these gearboxes, this collar is centered and supported by the front end bell bearing inside of the motor that was originally mounted directly to it. So if you get a C-face mount, which these are the most common, that's why I'm bringing this up. If you get a C-face mount, you need a way to support this in the center of this, because there is an oil seal in here. And as the swing arm comes up to pressure on the pump, this will start to move in and out. That's what I was talking about. It has to turn the right direction. And it will depend on whether it's a left or right exit, whether the input comes in here or here. So this is the original frame that this motor was mounted into. It's completely adjustable in all different directions. This is kind of a neat unit in itself right there. Again, that's all original out of the hospital. So, okay, as far as getting the pump hooked up to one of these, this is what I did. Right here
is just a piece of steel flat plate that I cut out, and down in here you can't really see it very well because there's not enough light, but there's 2 screws. If you have one of these pumps, you're familiar with this. There's 2 screws that go into this aluminum cap in here that the original pump handle mounted to. I just took that off and just cut out a piece of steel flat bar, drilled a couple holes in it, got some shorter screws because the pump handle is thicker. Just a couple of stainless panhead screws, and put them in there. These are 5/8 ID lock collars. They have a set screw in them. I keep these set screws out because they're handy for putting a few drops of lubrication in there. A good source for pins or hardened axles like this for doing this kind of stuff. These are your just a standard pin for like tractor hitches, equipment, stuff like that. They're a perfect 5/8 inch diameter. They work great. I just shoved it through the hole there and melted it on, so to speak. So same thing here. This is 5/8 keyed output. I ended up just welding it on. The welds aren't actually quite as ugly as they look like on here on camera, but this camera is not really focusing very well up close. Coming down here, again, there's the Desiccant filter. It's a Napa brand. Just goes right into the intake of the pump. Same thing down here. This is the original foot plate. 2 Phillips screws, top and bottom. You can see that right there. I just cut the sides off and welded a single collar to the base plate. And again, this was actually I think this was a steering shaft out of an old lawnmower, but whatever. Any 5/8 rod. Try to stick with some pretty heavy duty stuff. It minimizes the amount of flex that happens in the equipment when you come up to the higher pressures. This is 1/2 inch by, I believe, 1.25 inch flat bar. This is actually a piece off an old engine stand they had. One little bit of interesting information. Again, if you don't already know this, if you've been into high pressure air, HPA, nitro paintball stuff, you may already know this. This hose is a hydraulic hose. Local auto parts store made this for me. I think it cost 18 bucks, 20 bucks, something around there. It's very soft and flexible, surprisingly, and it's only like 31 degrees out here right now. And it's much more flexible than the original short hose. These pumps are 1/8 inch NPT thread, so that's a direct fit. Then I just screwed the female Foster quick disconnect right to the end of it, and works great. Got me a longer hose for very little money. So I'm going to go get the Marauder and let you guys watch this. We got the Marauder hooked up. About 1,800 pounds in it right now, so. And I've had this running for sometimes as long as 25, 30 minutes and get very little heat buildup in the pump, less than doing it by hand because it's a more consistent, smooth motion. for about 2150 right there. Just to give you an idea, the gun completely empty, absolutely no air pressure whatsoever. It takes about 11 minutes for this setup at this speed to fill the gun completely full.
About 2,650 pounds, which is about 165 bar.
So here we are at, well, that's really hard to see, right at 200 bar, just over.
I just All right, we're at 3,000 psi. Let's go shoot something.